My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 32 years old, and I live in a quiet part of Portland where the rain feels more like a companion than weather. I work as a freelance contractor, kitchens, bathrooms, the odd repair here and there. Not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and in a way it keeps me grounded. This is the story I've never told anyone. Call it, I fixed her sink. Then she looked at me like she knew me before. It started like any ordinary Tuesday. I had just finished a backsplash job in Northwest Hills when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I ignore those, but something made me pick up. A quiet voice on the other end. Hi, is this Ethan? You fixed Mrs. Klein's shower last summer. She said you were trustworthy. Her voice was soft, slightly hesitant. Young, maybe mid-30s. Yeah, I said, wiping drywall dust from my hands. That's me. What's the issue? There was a pause. My kitchen sink. It's leaking. I've had 2 plumbers come and go. They made it worse. Her address was 10 minutes away. I figured easy job, in and out. I could use the cash. But when I got there, nothing was easy about it. The house was modest, tucked into a cul-de-sac, blanketed with ivy vines and an oddly familiar blue mailbox. The door was slightly open when I knocked. That already felt strange. Before I could call out, she appeared, barefoot on the hardwood floor, in a worn gray sweater that hung off one shoulder. Dark auburn hair, tied up but not neatly. Her eyes, that's what hit me first. Greenish hazel but heavy, like they had seen more than a lifetime. Thanks for coming, she said, stepping aside. Kitchen's through here. Her name was Lila. She didn't offer a handshake, but her presence filled the room. The kind of presence that makes you forget what you came in for. I crouched under the sink. Old copper pipes, corroded seal. A 10-minute fix if you knew what you were doing. But I wasn't thinking about the pipes. I could feel her eyes on me, watching. Do I know you? She asked suddenly. I paused. My head bumped the underside of the counter. Not unless you've had another sink guy lately. She laughed. But there was something underneath it. It wasn't flirtation. It was something deeper, confused, maybe haunted. When I stood, she was still watching me. You remind me of someone, she said quietly. Someone I knew a long time ago. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and packed up my wrench. That should do it. Try running the tap. She did, and the water flowed clean, no leak. But she didn't look at the sink. She kept looking at me like I was a memory she couldn't place. You're not married, are you? She asked. That threw me off. No, not anymore. She didn't ask why. She just nodded again, slow and distant. Then, almost like it wasn't meant to be spoken aloud, she whispered, Would you stay for tea? We sat in silence, her at the kitchen table, me on a bar stool near the window. The tea was cinnamon spiced. Her fingers traced the edge of the cup, eyes staring out at nothing. You really don't remember me? She asked again. I shook my head. Should I? She smiled sadly. Maybe not. Maybe that's better. Over the next hour, I learned strange fragments. She was an artist, painted mostly in oils. She had lived abroad for years, and she had come back here after a loss. But the most chilling detail? She had once worked as an art therapist at a psychiatric facility, and that place was where my older brother, Mason, had been committed for nearly a year. The puzzle pieces didn't quite fit, but something about her gaze, the way she looked at me like I was supposed to mean something, it lingered in my mind like a half-finished song. That night, I barely slept. I dreamed of paint-streaked hands, of a woman whispering something in a room full of rain, of my brother screaming from behind a window, and someone holding his hand, a woman with hazel eyes. I woke up sweating, and for the first time in years, I opened the file box I hadn't touched since Mason died. Inside were drawings, pages torn from journals. Most were abstract, some were dark, but one was a painting, half-finished, a woman in a loose gray sweater by a sink, and in her eyes was me. I stared at that old sketch for hours. The lines weren't perfect. Mason wasn't an artist, but the emotion in it was clear. the shading around her eyes, the loose fall of her hair. It was unmistakably Lila, and that meant one of two things. Either my mind was playing tricks on me, or this woman I just met, the woman whose sink I fixed, once meant something to my brother, maybe everything. I went back the next day. I didn't call, didn't text. I just showed up. Her front door was locked this time. I knocked. No answer. The windows were shut. The warm, curious energy from yesterday had disappeared. I was about to leave when I heard it, classical music faintly, from inside. And then the door creaked open. Lila stood there. No makeup, oversized hoodie, hair down and messy. She didn't look surprised. "You came back," she said. "You knew Mason Cole, didn't you?" She didn't blink, just stepped back to let me in. The silence in the house felt different now, heavier. We sat in the living room, not touching, barely breathing. "I was his therapist," she said finally. "But it wasn't supposed to be more than that." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "Mason, he was brilliant. Tortured, yes, but also kind, insightful. He painted when words didn't work. And sometimes, I think he knew me better than I knew myself." "Why didn't you tell me yesterday?" I asked. "Because I didn't know if you remembered him, or me, or anything. And I didn't want to bring you back to pain if you had managed to forget." I nodded slowly. "I haven't forgotten. I buried it." Mason had been everything I wasn't. Where I was practical, he was poetic. Where I built things, he broke them down to the bone. He was also bipolar, though we didn't know it until it was too late. Our family fractured because of it. My father blamed weakness, my mother faded into silence. I did what I could. Took him to the hospital. Watched him disappear into locked wards and therapy rooms. And somewhere in that maze of clinical white walls, he met her. "You loved him?" I asked quietly. Her eyes shimmered. "Yes, but not the way you think. It wasn't physical. It was like looking into someone else's wounds and recognizing your own. We were mirrors, but that's not love you can live with. It's love that burns you down." She stood up and walked to a cabinet, pulled out something wrapped in cloth. When she handed it to me, I felt it instantly, canvas. I unwrapped it slowly. It was Mason's last painting, not the sketch I had. A full, vivid, haunting canvas. It was a kitchen scene. A man crouched at a sink, back turned. And the woman watching him, she wasn't just Lila. She was me. I froze. "What is this?" "I don't know how he knew," she whispered. "But the last week before he left, he kept saying, 'He'll find you one day,' not because of the pipes, but because you're the only one who won't break when you see the truth." I sat down hard. My hands shook. "Why me?" "Because," she said, kneeling in front of me, her hands gently on my knees. "Mason said you see things for what they are. You don't run. You rebuild." I left her house that night carrying the painting under my arm and something heavier in my chest. The next few days blurred. I researched. I called old staff at the psychiatric center. I talked to his former nurse. I even visited his old room, now a janitor's closet. Everything felt like a ghost, but I couldn't stop seeing her face in that painting. My face, the sink, the eyes. A week later, Lila texted me, "Come over. I need to show you something." When I arrived, she was in the backyard, barefoot in the grass, standing beside an easel. On the canvas, a new painting, still wet, brushstrokes full of motion. It was of us, her watching me fixing her sink. The same scene as Mason's, but warmer. She turned to me. I couldn't paint for 5 years after he died. But now, somehow, this felt like a beginning. She walked closer. Her hands were paint-stained, her eyes more alive than the day we met. "I don't know what this is between us, Ethan," she said. "Maybe we're healing pieces of someone else's story. Or maybe we're writing a new one." I didn't answer. I just kissed her. Not with urgency, but with understanding. Like we were both saying yes. To the mess, the memories, the loss. To the sink that started it. And the love we were afraid to deserve. 2 months passed. In that time, Lila and I became something. undefined. We weren't labeling it. We weren't rushing. But I found myself spending more mornings in her kitchen than in my own. I fixed a few more things around the house. A door hinge, a flickering light, a squeaky step. But none of it felt like work. Felt like healing. Still, something hovered between us. The painting, Mason's last words, and a truth I hadn't yet faced. It was early October when my mother called. "Ethan," she said, "someone from the hospital came by today. They dropped off an envelope. Said it was in Mason's file and never got released." She sounded confused, or maybe tired. Grief has a way of aging people in invisible ways. I picked it up that same evening. A plain brown envelope, sealed in brittle glue. Inside was a handwritten letter. Faded ink. Unmistakable slant. Mason's handwriting. If they're reading this, I'm probably gone. You always said I was too dramatic. Maybe I was. Maybe I still am. But I need you to know something. She never broke me. Lila. She didn't save me either. But she saw me. Every piece, even the ones I tried to bury. She saw how I spiraled. How I painted the truth instead of speaking it. How I loved through colors because words always got caught in my throat. She never crossed any lines. I did. But she forgave me even when I couldn't forgive myself. And now, I hope you'll forgive her too. Because here's the twist, big brother. She saw you too. She painted you before she knew your name. And when I asked her why, she said, "Because he feels like home, even in his absence." I stopped reading. I sat there in my truck, the letter trembling in my hands, rain crawling down the windshield like silent tears. Mason wasn't asking for pity. He was asking for peace. And somewhere in those painted shadows, he had left us both a way forward. I went back to Lila's that night. No warning, no plan. Just me, the letter in my coat pocket, and a storm behind me. She opened the door before I could knock, as if she knew I'd come. "You read it," she whispered. I read it. We didn't speak for a long moment. She led me to the canvas room, where she had painted for the first time in years. Dozens of paintings now leaned against the walls. Of light filtering through blinds, of Mason's unfinished faces, of water dripping from taps, of two hands reaching but never touching. And then, in the center, the newest piece. Not a painting of me, not her, just a home, warm, lived in, cracked but standing. "I painted us this time," she said softly. "Not who we were, not who we lost, just us. Now, we didn't kiss, not right away. We just stood there, side by side, in silence that wasn't awkward anymore. It was sacred. It's been a year since that night. Lila and I now live in a small cottage 2 hours outside Portland. She paints. I build furniture. We host quiet dinners and talk about everything and nothing at all. Sometimes we talk about Mason. We keep one of his paintings above the kitchen sink. The one with the wrench, the woman, the stair. It's not a memory anymore. It's a map, because every love story doesn't begin with a kiss. Some begin with a leak, a toolbox, and a question you never knew you needed answered. And sometimes, the person who saves you doesn't mean to. They just look at you like they've known you forever, and you realize, maybe they have. Love doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it sneaks in through a broken pipe and an open door. Sometimes it wears old sweaters and paints your name in silence. But real love, the kind that rebuilds, doesn't ask to be perfect. It just asks you not to run when you see the cracks. Because somewhere between the wrench and the wreckage, you find the home you didn't know you were looking for.